In this video, I'm going to show you how I paint beautiful clouds. The things I do first, the colors I use, the brushes I choose. Hi, I'm Layne Johnson. Welcome to my studio. The supplies I'm going to use in this series is Strathmore stretch canvas, Maimeri Puro oil paints, and a variety of my favorite brushes from Princeton brush. Of course, one of the first things I do is mix color, and so what color am I mixing? Blue. And usually I mix a lot of different blues. So I'm starting out with some blue here, cerulean blue and white together. I always believe that order matters, and one of the general rules of thumb that I follow is I paint the thing furthest away first. So, the sky. Let's go a little faster. I'm using one of my favorite brushes. It's the Catalyst line of brushes from Princeton. It's number 12. This is the Polytip Bristle Angle Bright. Holds a lot of paint, and I really start out most of my skies with this brush. Big brush, and I love it. We get questions all the time, what blue do I use for the skies I'm painting? And really it depends on the scene. This particular one I'm using cerulean blue, which is not one I use all the time. Ultramarine blue I will typically use in most paintings, but it typically will mix several blues, and I will also typically temper them with a little bit of earth tone color. That might be a castle earth, or it might be a burnt sienna. In this particular painting, I'm not tempering it quite as much as on other things, but I think it's going to be a nice, clean-looking sky. They will also have some white parts of clouds that are more vague in them, so it's not just a solid blue. By painting the blue first, I can gauge the color of the clouds better. It's also defining the contour of the clouds, the negative shape of the sky. Let's slow down a little bit. I'm going to a mop brush. This is one of my favorite ones. It's a 1-inch select oval mop. It's a really soft brush. I almost always use these dry. I use them as a soft blending brush. They're very good. Here I'm using one of my favorite blocking brushes. It's the Catalyst. This is the number 6 Angle Bright. Another important thing when you're painting the sky is basically you have to understand it's behind everything. So these are called sky holes. It's one of the most important things you can do to help a tree look realistic. So I'm bringing this gray down. I've already dropped in some of the preliminary colors on clouds, and typically I will start with some of the darker colors, but here I'm using these lighter value colors to make sky holes. One of the important things about sky holes, at least I think so, is the value on them typically needs to be a little bit darker. Otherwise, the hole will look like it's out in front of the tree, and you don't want that. So basically, you're gauging the value of what's behind the tree, and then in this case, it's these clouds. And the clouds are not finished by all means, but the trees aren't done either. So these were just block-ins. They may be accurate, may have to come back and adjust them later, and that's perfectly normal. But right now, I'm working more just blocking in and letting these contours come to life. And again, I don't worry about them being perfect. This is the early blocking stage. More detail will come later, so don't worry about getting it perfect. Now, other brushes will work well here. You can use rounds, Filberts, and maybe I will later on to do more of the detail type things, but right now, let's just worry about the block-in. And later, I know I'll be painting the foliage of these trees going out beyond where I'm painting now, overlapping, because I don't want to basically go up to the edge of something and end up creating some sort of halo. Now, let's go to the clouds. Now, if you're going to paint clouds, you're going to have to use a Filbert. That's my opinion. I love the Filbert brush for painting clouds. This is an Imperial number 8 brush from Princeton. And of course, like I said, it's a Filbert. The Filbert has that perfect shape. Let's speed this up. Now I've already blocked in some of the shadow colors of the clouds here using some ultramarine blue and some of the earth tones that kind of tone them down, and white of course. But adding the highlights here, I'm using titanium white, but it's also tempered a little bit with cadmium yellow deep. I'd like to use that color a lot on highlights. Yeah, I believe that if you're painting white highlights on clouds, you really do need to have some, probably usually yellow, to go with the white. Otherwise the white's just too stark, too cold almost. Like I said, I blocked in the shadow areas of the clouds before I got to the highlights. That way, in the same manner, you can judge how strong your highlights need to be. And the darker values were all like ultramarine blue, ultramarine violet, and some earth tone type colors that kind of temper them. But then when I go back in with the highlights, I block in the basic highlights, and in between, like right here, I am just kind of smoothing between the highlights and between the darks. And that's why this particular brush is good for that. It's got a nice soft feel to it, and you can model with it really well. So also you can go in with the darker values back and forth, pulling them back and forth to kind of model these parts of the clouds. You're using some of the Imperial, as you can see, on parts of the cloud, but eventually it will all get covered up, though it will still be effective for luminosity because of the light reflecting through the layers. Okay, let's slow it down a little bit. Sometimes you'll be mixing a color and then applying it, kind of putting a shade in between the darks and the lights, and you're only covering part of the imprimatur. You're almost using it, and it creates a phenomenon called simultaneous contrast. The color that you have on their palette may look really warm, but when you put it back on the painting, it may look much cooler. It's an interesting phenomenon. It's always interesting when you're doing clouds because there are different parts of clouds, and it's not like here's a cloud, here's another cloud. They all work together. And really, I'm still technically just blocking in. I'm not worrying about final details here. You can kind of get into details. It's kind of fun, but I really don't worry about doing that at this stage. I know at the end of this session, the clouds will look good, I hope, but it's not necessarily going to be finished. The finishing comes at the finish. After all, parts of the painting are blocked in. You know, why do we paint details before we should paint details? The answer for me is because they're fun to paint. But you do have to restrain yourself. It's good to do this, but to not just focus on this. Got to make sure the whole thing looks good, not just parts of it. And of course, it helps if you have a muse. This is Newt. He likes to sit in my lap sometimes and watch me paint. He's a good buddy. I'm getting here at the end of this session. I think it looks pretty good. The clouds are coming together. The blue sky looks believable, looks good. Looks like a nice, fresh sky. And I think I'm about, I don't know, what do you think, Newt? Well, I hope you enjoyed watching me paint the sky and clouds. As you can see, by using an underpainting, these clouds were able to form quickly. The first thing I painted was the blue portion of the sky, the thing furthest away. Then I blocked in the contours of the clouds with my favorite big old Catalyst Angle Bright. It was the perfect brush for the job. However, by the time I started to work on the clouds, it was clear how indispensable Filbert brushes were. When you say clouds to me, I say Filberts. In the next video, I'm going to show you how I paint landscapes with real depth. I'll see you there.